He driving his boat up there. That's the bad side of the river to get a boat up.
Yep, it's pretty shallow.
Very.
We're gonna have a, well, the roll call first.
Loretta Arthur. Robin Hanger.
Yes.
Dennis Smith.
Yes.
Tony Casada. Mike Meyer.
Here. Find my agenda. All right, I have the invocation and the pledge. Tony, will you do the pledge for us?
Yep. We're not going to do the pledge. Let Robin do the prayer.
Oh, you don't want me to do the prayer?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, you can do the pledge. Let Robin do the prayer. Go ahead, Robin.
Father, we thank you for this day. We ask you, Lord, to bless all the people of our community that have been devastated by this storm. Help us, Lord, to make the right decisions for the best for the city of Holly Hill. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I usually make my wife do that when she's being punished. Go ahead.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All righty. Well, there's a lot of minutes there. Did everybody look them over? Any additions, corrections, deletions?
I looked it over and I'd make a motion to, if whenever you're ready to,
I'm ready.
I'll motion to approve the minutes from the past meeting.
All right, I have a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Second it.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, reply like sign. Hearing none, motion carries. Agenda item, Mr. Walker.
Yes, Board, this evening we're looking at a request for accommodation, and this has to do with the owners of 328 Clifton Avenue. So back in November of 2021, the owners of 328 Clifton Avenue, Joanna and Lawrence Wharton, and they're not able to be here this evening, they were notified that their son was living in California at the time, an adult, and he was in California and he was crossing the street and he was hit by a car. And he had catastrophic injuries and will need continual care for the rest of his life. So his parents went to California. They got him, brought him back here to Holly Hill, and he's in a wheelchair, and their home is not equipped at all with a wheelchair ramp, or had not been equipped at all with a wheelchair ramp or a deck that could accommodate a wheelchair. So they needed to carry him in and out of the home. So the property is zoned R2, which is residential, and that requires a front yard setback of 30 feet. Well, the house is 33 feet from the front property line, but the deck and ramp, which they did go ahead and build, extend 8 feet from the house at its widest point. So that means that the deck and the ramp are 5 feet into the required front setback. And because the ramp extends into the front setback, the applicants need official approval from the city in order to keep the ramp in its current location. So there's a provision for requesting accommodation in accordance with Section 82-322 of the Land Development Regulations, and this is pursuant to the Fair Housing Act. The Land Development Regulations provide in Section 82-322 the information that's required in order to make a request for special accommodation or reasonable accommodation, and the information that has been provided is in your staff report. There are several items there, 6 items that have to be submitted for information, and that information has been provided in your staff report. And then you have to evaluate whether or not the request is a reasonable request. So you get the information, then you have to look at whether or not it's a reasonable request. And Section 82-833B outlines some of the items that have to be considered in deciding as to whether or not the request for accommodation is reasonable. So staff listed the items in your staff report, and also some commentary was provided on each item that you as a board may find helpful. So that is also in your staff report. So based on this information, there are 4 courses of action that can be taken by this board or by the commission. And one is to find that the 5-foot encroachment into the front yard setback for a handicap ramp and deck at 328 Clifton Avenue is a reasonable request and approve the encroachment. Or you can find that the 5-foot encroachment into the front yard setback for a handicap ramp and deck at 328 Clifton Avenue is a reasonable request, but approve the encroachment with conditions. Or 3, you can find that the encroachment into the front yard setback for a handicap ramp is a reasonable request, but approve a different amount of encroachment. In other words, instead of 5 feet, you can say, well, only 2 feet or 4 feet, or some come up with another number. Or finally, you can find that the 5-foot encroachment into the front yard setback for a handicap ramp and deck at 328 Clifton is not a reasonable request and deny the encroachment. So those are the 4 actions that you can recommend, one of 4 to the City Commission. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Would y'all like to speak for it or against it? No? Anyone on the board have any discussion?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
I believe that this family has already experienced enough devastation in their life. I visited this property. I've looked at it myself, and I don't believe there's any question as to the fact that we need to approve this to allow them to have the ramp and extension without any exceptions. And I also will, and they're not here, that's great. I just think it's great for this young man to have parents that are going to do this, and the responsibility that they are undertaking. I don't believe that they need any more heartbreak or problems. I think that we should approve to let this happen just the way it's read on the first suggestion there.
Anyone else like to speak?
Brian, I've got a question dealing with the handicapped situations. When people put ramps up and decks at a house like this, which I'm in favor of it, but normally they're built out of wood or metal. So if they would sell the house, the ramp could come down.
Right.
The ramp wouldn't be built out of concrete.
No. I looked into that also. ADA will provide an aluminum ramp and deck if these people so go that direction, but they've already built it,
Right.
and I believe
No wooden one.
it's wooden,
Currently would.
but they did it because they didn't know that they could get any assistance. They have since been notified by me that they could get assistance. So there is a possibility that they'll come back and redo it, but I still don't think there should be any exceptions, because it'll when they go to ADA, it'll be whatever ADA says is compliant and necessary for that young man's wheelchair.
And the restrictions are great. I've had experience building ADA ramp on a mission trip in Georgia once for a paraplegic fellow. Both his legs were cut off, and he had to go to the great big old fellow. Had to go to the dialysis 3 times a week. And they were having to pick, even though he was missing his legs just above the knees, halfway, he still weighed 230 pounds. He was a big fellow. And people were having to pick him up and carry him down the 6 or 8 steps to get 3 times a week and carry him back up it. And I, like you, Robin, I don't see any issue with it. My only question is that it's a ramp, and it's like steps, and it's not permanent. Why does that setback apply? That's the part I'm not understanding.
Because it's attached to the house. So when it's attached to the house, it becomes part of the main structure, and setbacks apply to the main structure.
Now, if they had gone through the ADA, it would not be attached to the house. It would be an aluminum structure
With
that
a-
wouldn't be
Right,
attached to
with a-
it. So therefore, it could be removed in the future. And down the road, they're going to have to do this because what they've built won't last forever. But still, if we say with restrictions now,
No, absolutely.
and
I agree with you.
ADA changes in the future, then they're going to have to come back. They've already gone through enough heartache.
Sure.
Right.
It is what ADA says.
I think we're all of that same opinion. Dennis, you have anything?
Now, Scott was saying something.
No, I think, it's where, I thought where Tony was going is, should there be a condition on there that this is allowed as long as they own the house? But once they sell the house, if the person in there is no
Oh, right.
longer.
Oh,
doesn't
I
have
didn't
an
think-
ADA, then
I didn't think about that.
I did.
Come out.
I did. I didn't think it was appertended,
I
Scott.
thought that's where Tony was going when you were,
Well, yes, but I wanted to make sure that if somebody, they sell the house and somebody wants to take that down and not have it, if it's
Or-
a concrete ramp.
Or, like you said, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but that brings up a point. If they sell the house and somebody assumes they can build a porch there or a deck, no.
Right.
No.
So, okay. The restrictions would be that as long as they own the house and it is being used for their care, custody
ADA purpose.
of ADA purposes,
Right.
then we will go with it.
Right, or you could say that as long as that young man is living in the house, because they could sell
Well-
it to a relative.
They could, but
Keep
let's
the young
say,
man there.
let's say they're not in their, they're not young either.
Right.
Let's say they need it in the future. I would rather say that as long as that young man is around, or they are residing there, and they have the need for it, then it's okay.
Yeah.
But if they sell it, or they no longer have the need and they want to take it out, when they take it out, they can't just put it back.
Right.
And then if they sell it to somebody who wants it, they can always come in and apply.
Right,
for
and
it.
if they're in
But
need
there are
of it,
reasons for
if
having.
they're in need of it, then
Exactly.
okay.
Come back and apply and
Yeah.
extend it.
Exactly.
How would you word that, Scott?
I would say that it, approved with a condition that, that if this property is sold, that the ramp must be removed unless the new purchaser applies and approve for continuation of the,
They're in need of it.
yeah.
Okay.
Why
You guys, everybody comfortable with that?
that as
Not yet.
long as it is used as a handicap ramp, it can stay, no matter who owns it. If the new people who buy it are handicapped,
Right.
why
Why change
have
it?
them come back
That's,
in?
you can, what, all we're gonna know is the property changes hands, really.
Correct.
That's all we can look at that independently. To know that nobody is going in and out of there that needs handicap, we're gonna have to investigate. We're gonna have to monitor it. And so, how are we, you're gonna have to keep an eye on the place and say, hey, we went a week and no one in a wheelchair went in and out of there. When it changes hands, we know that, we can check a deed in public records. It's now changed hands,
Provide,
unless you can establish that you still need it.
Okay.
And then that puts the burden on them to come to us with proof, as opposed to us having to prove
That they don't.
that they don't need it.
Right.
Hard
Hard to prove a negative, right.
Could it, say, God forbid, the son passes away, they're still there. Okay, yeah, they get to have it there. And like you said, they may need it as they get older or whatever. We won't know that situation, but when they sell it, it's public information when they sell it. And we can say, okay, you've triggered now, this provision is going to expire unless you can show, the new owner can show they are still in need of that, as opposed to putting the burden on the city to prove they no longer need it.
Right.
all right, then I would make a motion to approve them based on their child being there, their need for it, or if it's sold and the new person can provide evidence that they need it, then it can stay. If the new person decides they want to take it out and then later on put it back, then they would have to come back to us.
I would just say when this property
Too much.
sells,
if
Disapproval expires.
it's
Approval
the
expires.
approval expires when it's sold.
When it's sold, and then they have, unless they have
Okay.
the burden of coming in and showing that they're entitled to it for the
Right.
same purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
For ADA purposes.
Just like he said.
That's the simplest thing for us, I think.
Right, I agree. So then I will entertain a motion for approval on the condition that when the property sells, this approval terminates.
I'll make that motion.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a motion and a second. Any more discussion?
Nope.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say, reply like sign.
And just saying,
Motion
Brian and I
carries.
actually talked about it today. It may come back, it may need to be probably amended in the code, which means it come back for y'all for recommendation. Brian and I discussed the idea that something like this, to make these people go through this,
No.
seems a little burdensome to me.
I think so too.
And so maybe we can set up an
An
administrative.
administrative, that exactly.
I think
I
that-
told my wife that this afternoon
So-
before we
We
came.
talked about it, it just seemed, this particular, I don't know if you remember, this is the same process the people with the horse had. They went through the same exact process, and I'm pretty sure I said both to this body and to the commission, an example of why you would need this is if you needed a handicap ramp and it extended into the setback. That's what this reasonable accommodation's for under the fair housing ADA.
Right.
Boom, here this is.
Right.
And so I think under certain circumstances, in my head is, we provide notice to surrounding property owners, and if nobody raises an objection on certain types of approvals. And
Correct.
I gotta figure out how to word that.
That's your
Like, for
job.
instance, the horse one, no.
Right.
That's not being approved.
That's why you get paid the big bucks.
Yes.
Anything that says
So
horse
we'll
in
come up
it,
with a way to word it.
it's outta
We'll
here.
come back to you for a recommendation, because it'd be a
Okay.
code change. But Brian and I talked about it today. This is an example of a situation to make these people go through this is really, in my mind, a little burdensome.
They're
It should
already
be
heartbroken.
administratively approved.
right.
So
Yeah.
what you're saying, Scott, is that Brian would be able to make that decision,
Or Joe.
or Joe, if it was brought to him? Yeah, I agree. I
It-
agree.
It'll come back to you in the form of an ordinance at some point,
Right.
possibly. It's just something Brian and I talked about today.
Well, we should this board should make a recommendation for that ordinance, aren't we?
You could, yeah, you could actually tag along with this if that's okay with you. I
Yeah.
mean,
I would recommend
direct
that.
staff to look at a way to make administrative approval for these types of,
Well, what does the rest of the board think about that? What do you think about making that recommendation to the commission?
it'll still come back
Get
to
it
you
on the
for
record
wording.
and make them think about
I
it.
think, yeah, I don't think the people should,
I think something simple like this,
Right.
I mean,
I agree. I completely
you
agree.
know, Brian or Joe should be able to call that shot right there in the office.
because if they had a person that wanted to actually follow the law totally, that, went to an architect and all that, that ramp may not have got built for 6 months, and then we're in a situation, they're carrying that person
Yeah, I
for 6
agree.
months until all this goes through, the process.
Well, it's 2 months for us, more or less, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Probably, I
So
mean,
by the time you get an architect and all that, it could be
just to
up
get our approvals.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's no, it's all our rules. So, when we set up these processes, and whether it's this or a variance or whatever, these are our rules. It's not state law, it's not federal law, it's our rules inside how these variations can be approved.
Right.
I think you need to give adjoining neighbors notice, but no, I can't imagine anybody objecting
Yeah.
to something like this.
You're right. It's our town.
Yeah, so, this just seems to make them, it would be even worse if they were having to carry this kid out of a regular
Right.
house, waiting 2 months for a very simple approval.
Right.
Yeah, that would be even worse. They got it in, Brian halted all code enforcement, let's just go through the process, let's resolve it so there's no code. So it's not as urgent, but you could have someone who, well, we got to get approvals, we're going to have to keep carrying you until we get this ramp done. Making them wait 2 months while we go through this, to my mind, is unnecessary.
I
It's not
agree.
protecting the public, which is really what our goal is, these things, so.
Well, I would accept a motion that we recommend to the commission that we somehow make this system administrative, so that Brian or Joe, whoever is in that position, can make the call, set up a system so that they can make that call.
I'll make a motion to approve that.
Okay, I have the motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, reply like sign.
And the details will still come back before you. This is the
Right.
concept to say,
Right, right.
conceptually
Yeah,
bring
yeah.
back.
Right.
Hearing none, motion that carries.
For the first one, Robin Hanger,
Yes.
Dennis Smith,
Yes.
Tony Casada,
Yes.
Mike Meyer.
Yes.
And the second recommendation to the board, Robin Hanger,
Yes.
Dennis Smith,
Yes.
Tony Casada,
Yes.
Mike Meyer.
Yes. As I read this, old business, do we have any? Any board staff communications?
No?
Anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
Adjourn. Motion.
Motion second, no discussion required, all in favor say aye. Aye. That is not a roll call vote.